Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tzvi, for sponsoring the breakfast and the shir. And this topic, I originally titled on drafting Haredim into the Israeli army, but I changed it later then to drafting Yeshiva students. We will touch on the Haredim piece, but I think that Yeshiva students is probably just a better topic, and it applies to not just one particular culture, so it's helpful. And I also want to stress that I'm trying to take a halachic perspective, and a few introductory remarks. We may have to do two parts to this. I wanted to give you a full source packet with much in your appendix, which is why it's pretty thick, so you can do some of your own reading if you're interested in it, and we may have to return to it next week as well. Just so you know, next week, just some housekeeping, there's Rabbi David Lau, the former chief rabbi of Israel, is coming and giving a shir be'ivrit, I believe at 9 o'clock. So I'm not sure if that impacts this chevra, but just wanted to keep you informed of what's going on. If people want this shir to continue, I can do it. I'll just probably go to him first and then come afterwards. I guess I won't be able to stay for the whole thing. This is a major topic, very heated, very emotional. There are political pieces to it. We'll touch on that for sure, and some of the history. But I will try to stay away from particular people and events. You're welcome to join us if you'd like.
I just want to say hi.
Thank you for saying hi. Hi. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for your service.
Yes, thank you for your service, exactly. I think part of the issue with taking events and people as a focus is that, first of all, my knowledge of the events and people and situations is limited at best, and also it's always better to talk about the ideas, and then the ideas and the halacha and the framework could help inform us on the particular issue in how it's played out at the contemporary level. I also think that we should focus on solutions if we can. Being pragmatic is always important, as opposed to getting stuck in an ideological battle without any solution. As someone mentioned, if we could solve this in a 45-minute shir, then what seems to be why has it taken us 70 years to solve this? So I want to approach it with humility. But we're going to look at some of the sources, and like every case, every shir that we talk about contemporary issues, I'm not going to take a specific stance. I'll let you decide, but I will also try to present to you in a intellectually honest way some of the sources and some of the positions that have been taken over the course of the last, I guess, somewhat modern history. And I also think that if we understand whatever position you have, if you understand the other side, it actually equips you a lot more to, as I mentioned in my bulletin article this week, Rav Granot said, it gives you freedom to understand both sides of an issue and then make a choice. If you don't understand both sides, then really your own position is very weak because you haven't considered the possibility of the other side. So this is in general, my approach is to encourage independent thinking. Obviously, we have a halacha, we have a system, we have Torah, and there's a framework. But as my chinuch was, and what I tried to pass on, hopefully in the shir here, and in general, my approach is to encourage independent thinking, questioning, and critical thinking. So that's the goal. I'm not trying to insult anybody. I know that it's a very, very heated topic, and I understand that people want solutions, and they feel that there haven't been enough solutions really quickly enough. I just mentioned I was giving the shir in a different room, and someone said, it's just taking too long. We have to figure this out now. So I understand there's a certain sense of urgency. If you want a source sheet, there's a source sheet there. It also has an appendix in the back for your own reading. I tried to include as much as I could. And I guess with those introductions, let's just jump right in. So there was an article written by a Rabbi of mine, Rabbi Aaron Lopiansky, in Mishpacha magazine in 2013 on the draft, responding it from, I guess you could call it a Haredi approach. I can't find the article. I'm not sure if this is a sign of the times. But Mishpacha magazine itself has done somewhat of an evolution, I think, in many areas. So I couldn't find the article, but what I could find is a blog post quoting from the article. I read the article when I was in Israel. I was 20 maybe, was I? 21? 2013. So I found a blog post on the MSV Emunah blog that quotes from the article. So I thought, just to start with what Rabbi Lopiansky wrote, just jumping right into the issues. This is a quote from this article. The questions hurled at us from the Israel arena are powerful and cogent. How long can the Haredi public shirk their responsibility to serve in the army? Is their blood more precious than the non-Haredi's blood? And why can't they add a little math and English into their curriculum? How much can it impact their Torah study? Don't many yeshivos in America offer a rich secular curriculum without affecting the caliber of Ben Torah products? These questions need to be addressed head on, not only for the sake of a response to quote unquote them, quote unquote, but for ourselves. You see how he's sort of writing to the audience that he has, but I think I don't. If this article was published today, I don't know if it would say it in such a stark terms of us and them, but it's important to just see how he formulates it. We would be dishonest and insensitive if we do not ponder these questions with the gravity they deserve. And then he goes on to explain his position, or I guess he's sort of a spokesperson on some level for the Haredi position. And I'm going to kind of avoid the issue of the curriculum because it's not really exactly germane to the topic at hand. But he, according to this post by Harry Morales, he feels that Rabbi Lopiansky eloquently describes the ideals of the Haredi culture. On the other hand, he doesn't feel he does enough to answer these questions, which he feels validated that he even formulated in such a way, such a stark way, but he doesn't feel that he's really answered the questions head on. And he writes something there that I thought I was impressed with at the end, that he said, even though I admire and respect what Rav Lopiansky has tried to do here, the way in which he tried to do it, I do not think he succeeded in answering the very real, powerful, and cogent challenges he concedes are being asked. That said, if all Haredim were of the caliber of a man like Rav Lopiansky, I truly believe we could work things out. Which is sort of a theme that I'd like to somewhat point to, which is that we need to find like-minded people who are pragmatic and people who can solve the issue from a practical standpoint and not just an ideological one. One of the things that Rav Lopiansky points out as a response to why the Haredi community doesn't serve is that the army, at least it was founded on this ideal, and I'm not sure if it's still true today. As I mentioned, I'm going to just talk about the ideas and less about the application, but is that I think Ben Gurion even talks about this, that the army would be the great equalizer. It would be the great cultural equalizer in Israeli society. And the Haredi response to that was, we cannot maintain the Haredi ideals and culture if we are going to partake in this great equalizer. Another part of the argument is that the army is not a place for a Ben Torah. It has, let's say, anti-religious sentiments, or at one point in history it did. Maybe it doesn't as much today. I think it's probably safe to say that it does not have as much anti-religious sentiment. But at one time, as the idea of the great equalizer, somewhat had an agenda, an anti-religious agenda. I'm going to just skip the curriculum issue. I think that's a different topic altogether. I would also say that I put on a whole list of acknowledgments here of the different materials and people who I've learned from about this topic. And Rav Meir Twersky recently gave a talk about this, which is one of the reasons that I decided to give a shir on it. And he made a very important distinction, which I think we'll return to at the end. But just at the outset, Rav Twersky pointed out that there's a major difference between the categorical refusal of army service and the conditional refusal of army service. And I want to just be clear on this. Rav Lopiansky presented in Mishpacha magazine over 10 years ago, so I think we'd have to ask him what his position would be today. But just assuming this is his position, or a position that exists, it was clearly a conditional refusal. What do I mean by that? He's saying there's anti-religious, it's not the right thing, it's the culture. He's giving reasons why there's a refusal, but the refusal has a reason. And therefore, it's much more possible to find common ground. Whereas a categorical refusal, there's absolutely no way to come to any common ground. So Rav Tursky just made that point that even if one rejects the position of the conditional refusal or disagrees with it, it's much more within the ability to reason with. The categorical refusal, on the other hand, there is no room for finding common ground. Rav Alfred Cohen wrote an article about this in 1992 in the RJJ Journal, and I'll just start by reading some of the points that he makes in the beginning of the article, although I admit that it is certainly dated as it was written over 30 years ago. Since the founding of the State of Israel, the need for defense has been the highest priority of the community. Due to the overwhelming needs for security, virtually all able-bodied men and many women serve in the army for a period of a few years and then for additional service for decades thereafter. However, when the state was created, the then Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion came to an agreement with leaders of the religious party, whereby 400 yeshiva students were to be exempted from military service so that they may continue this Torah studies without interruption. After the government lifted restrictions on the establishment of new yeshivot, the number began to mount steadily. According to recent figures, these are not current figures, these are not current anymore, but according to the current figures in 1992, which is only higher now, in 1992, 18,400 yeshiva students were exempted from military service in 1988. Between 1976 and 1986, the proportion of yeshiva students out of the total population of 18-year-olds more than doubled from 2.5% to 5.3%, as the government steadily lifted the ceiling on how many students could acquire the exemption. The exemption of boys and men involved in learning Torah from serving in the army has at times aroused much resentment. It is a practice which has been and continues to be challenged not only by secular Jews, but even by many observant and dedicated Jews, even by some who benefit from the exemption. And he notes, as we mentioned, we're dealing here with a very emotional issue, the families of soldiers who daily risk their lives. And we just saw someone who, Rabbi Ezi Thaw, who risks his life, who risked and continues to risk his life when he serves. We just saw him walking through by our door 2 moments ago. There is anger too. Their lives are far from tolerant when they see. I'll start from the beginning of the sentence. The families of soldiers who daily risk their lives, should probably be risk their lives daily, are far from tolerant when they see yeshiva students strolling casually through the streets. There is anger too at the rabbis who instruct their students in the yeshiva to stand at attention on Yom HaZikaron to honor the fallen heroes, but at the same time teach their students not even to consider serving in the army. And there is frustration and bitterness in the yeshiva homes as well, where people live in privation all their lives in order to dedicate themselves to the ideal of learning Torah and yet have to bear the contempt of their fellow citizens. The present study will explore this issue hopefully from a dispassionate and objective position. It is our intention to identify the sources from Jewish tradition which support the practice, as well as those which seem to question the validity of exempting one group from military service. Just to touch briefly on, the history of this, in the back in your appendix, there's a chart, which I think comes from Rabbi Anthony Manning. It's a summary of the history of the rulings regarding the IDF draft, starting from 1948 all the way until 2023. In the back on page 12. So I'll just read the last part, because we talked about the founding of the state and its initial exemption of 400 students, which is just wild to think about that. 400 students, that was the amount of students that there were in Israel. So look at what he writes at the end here. In 2020, around 33% of men and 44% of women received exemptions from IDF service. Of those who received exemptions, roughly 45 were Haredim, 47 were secular, and 8 were religious Zionists. Between 2009 and 2022, the number of students in Israel grew by 19%. By comparison, the number of Haredi men learning in Yeshiva and Kola grew by 235% and is now around 156,000. So 400 to a rough estimate, this is a rough estimate from a few years ago, a rough estimate of over 150,000 people exempt. So, as you see, times have changed, and the question becomes, especially with the growing risks and potential two-front wars, etc., is this exemption still appropriate? So Rabbi Cohen, in his 1992 article, he notes that there is a moral imperative in Jewish sources when it comes to war. Unlike other cultures, we do not glorify the strength and vigor and triumphs of war so much as we realize the tremendous moral dangers which lurk in the war zone. It is not our tradition, however, to be tolerant of immorality and depravity which typically are rampant in army camp, but rather to seize the opportunity to grow spiritually even from such a situation. And he points out that it's a time when a person must be most careful about their Torah observance and their mitzvahs, because we'll see psukim about this, but a person who feels that they are not fitting, not appropriately spiritually prepared for war, are told to go home. So seemingly we see from the moral expectation that serving in the army is supposed to be part of a person's moral obligation. And the purity of thought, etc., and deed are true strength of the Jewish people and the source of any victory that they may enjoy. And he cites a number of sources to support that. And the question he asks is, what role are citizens supposed to play during a war? Are all equally obligated to serve on the battlefield? Are there distinctions to be made? Exemptions to excuse certain people? And he quotes, some say yes, some say emphatically no, and some say maybe. He quotes from a few different positions early in the founding of the State of Israel, actually somewhat even before this founding of the State of Israel. He quotes in the name of some within the religious Zionist camp who were opposed to drafting yeshiva students, even in the religious Zionist camp, and he quotes from some that were in favor. I'll just read from some of an excerpt of a story in the appendix. It's a story that is recorded by Rabbi Sha'ar Yashiv Cohen, chief rabbi of Haifa and the son of the Rav HaNazir. The Rav HaNazir was a student of Rav Kook, of David Cohen, and he is squarely in the religious Zionist camp. And he recalls, during the winter of 5708, which is 1947, 1948, I was one of the younger students at the Merkaz Harav Yeshiva, as well as a member of the Haganah, the pre-state Jewish defense organization. This was during the tense period of rioting and attacks that began after the 29th of November UN vote to establish a Jewish state, before the State of Israel was declared on the 5th of Iyar. In those days, there was much turmoil in the yeshiva, whether the student should enlist to fight and defend. Both my father, the Rav HaNazir, and Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook felt that it was incumbent upon all to go out and fight this milchemet mitzvah, which is something we're going to talk about. What is the category of a milchemet rishus, milchemet chova, milchemet mitzvah? A compulsory war in which all are obligated to participate. Well, as we'll see, the Mishnah in Sota says that if it's a milchemet mitzvah, everyone has an obligation to fight. However, those close to the Rosh Yeshiva at that time, it was Rav Yaakov Moshe Charlap. He succeeded Rav Kook, Rav Avram Yitzchak Cohen Kook. And he held the people close to him, and I think he himself, although he's saying it was people close to him, so I think there is record of him also taking this position, held the yeshiva students should continue their Torah studies in the yeshiva, and the merit of their Torah learning would bring victory in battle. Now he tells a story that at that time, he saw Rav Tzvi Yehuda walking in the street, slightly limping. And he said that, why? Like, what happened at yeshiva? Why do you look so concerned? He says, I saw that, he said, I'm in the Haganah, and I saw that someone wrote that the people who are fighting in the army and not learning in yeshiva are contradicting the view of Rav Kook, your father, meaning the Rav, the first founding Rav, the Rav Avram Yitzchak Cohen Kook. We're acting against him. Some people he said there was maybe a poster or something like that, an announcement. And Rav Tzvi Yehuda was horrified. He grabbed me by my shoulders and began to roar, "This is a complete forgery, a distortion and utter falsehood." He was so upset, his shouts echoed down the street. And he said that this letter that people are quoting from Rav Kook was against drafting Yeshiva students into the army in World War I, in the English army, in a foreign army. That's when he wrote it. He wrote it during World War I, and you can take a look at the letter I have on the appendix after this story from 1917. So there are those that sort of quote in the name of Rav Kook that he was against drafting Yeshiva students, but his own son said that was a forgery. It was a misrepresentation of his position about the Jewish army defending the Jewish state or the pre-state Jewish land, because he was writing it about the English army, which at that time had certain exemptions for clergy. And then the student who succeeded Rav Kook as Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva Merkaz Harav, Rav Yaakov Moshe Charlap, was against drafting students into the army. So you see, it was even in the early times of the state, it was a very contentious issue. So that's sort of by way of introduction. And then one final, I guess the best I could call it is lore, because I don't know exactly what happened between the conversation that happened between Rav Ben Gurion and Rav Avram Yishai Karel. It's the Chazon Ish. But there is an article that is quoted. It's an article written in Mishpacha magazine. I couldn't find any earlier source, but Rabbi Moshe Gorelik wrote an article filling a draft in Mishpacha magazine in 2012. And in this article, he quotes from a number of people. First of all, Shlomo Lawrence, who was a former member of Knesset, and others that talked with the Chazon Ish about this meeting. But there was a famous meeting between the Chazon Ish and, at that time, the Prime Minister, David Ben Gurion. You can see a picture that I included in your appendix, a picture of the Ben Gurion in the Chazon Ish's house. It's not exactly clear what happened during that meeting, but I will read a part of this as well, just to paint a picture. Again, there was an agreement made for 400 students with the Chazon Ish, and to apply that today would be, again, it's a completely different scenario. We're talking about over 150,000 exemptions versus 400. However, it's important to understand the history here. So, according to Rav Shlomo Lawrence, the conversation between Ben Gurion and the Chazon Ish went extremely well. Ben Gurion was very impressed with the Chazon Ish. And the Chazon Ish, when in conversation, he told others that he both had to give a give a slap and then a pat. So I guess it's sort of like he encouraged, at the same time gave his own criticism. And one of the things that this article claims that he said to other people, I only say this article claims, not to say that it's false. I just don't know. I don't have first-hand knowledge, and I don't even have second-hand knowledge. But this is an article that was written. He said that when he spoke to the Ben Gurion, Chazon Ish said that he made reference to a Gemara in Sanhedrin. And the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that there were two wagons, one heavily laden and the other empty. And the question is, who must make way for the other? It's basically like a question of, almost like a Choshen Mishpah question. You have two wagons. One wagon has a lot on it and the other wagon doesn't have any. And the Gemara says that the heavy wagon should be the one to go through this small alley before the empty wagon. And he reportedly said that our wagon is full of Torah and mitzvos, and for millennia, since Sinai, and your wagon is empty because it's only begun about 50 years ago with the beginning of Zionism. So you should let us go by in front because our wagon is heavy, and if you're really looking for a solution, then you should step aside and let us go ahead because we've had a longer history. That's, again, reported as to what he said. Just to unpack that for a few minutes, I saw somewhere that someone paraphrased this argument as, we care deeply about this issue, Torah and mitzvos and learning, and you don't care as much about this issue, so therefore you should cede to our approach because we have a whole approach and you don't care as much about this issue. Yes. Sorry, I'm going into the history and I'm not into the halacha. But
history,
yeah.
I think the part maybe that's missing is that prior to the Holocaust, it wasn't the custom of communities in Europe to learn yeshiva, like for everyone to learn yeshiva,
Yes.
right, until they're 40.
It's a great point.
The age is. Now one could say that post-Holocaust, this needed to happen to rebuild Torah.
Right.
But that's different than this thing about the wagons, because one could argue that the wagon was an issue pre-Holocaust, and that wasn't something.
It's a great point. No, it's a great point. Yeah, everything. You're right. The history goes far further back than just these conversations. 100%. It has been shared with me. Rabbi Elephant told me this. Rabbi Yosef Elephant from the Mir told me that exact point that you made, Dovi. That the whole founding of the Haredi, which is a modern term, approach of everyone studying in Torah was primarily to rebuild what was lost in the Holocaust. And today, it is a different situation. We have a vibrant Haredi community, and we can't. I think he said this. I'm paraphrasing because I don't have exactly. He didn't write this, and it was many years ago that I'm using my memory. But he said we have to look at it differently, and we can't just say, well, that's what they did with the Chazon Ish. That's what happened in Bnei Brak in the 40s. Like, we're in a different scenario. So I agree 100%. In terms of the wagon piece, that's where I think this other formulation is. I don't know if it's more accurate, but it's more logical. I think what he means is not just like we have more zechuyos and you have less zechuyos. I think he probably means very practically like when you have two parties, and for one party and you're doing a negotiation. And that's why I think it makes sense that Ben Gurion was very impressed with this, because he was very practical. Otherwise, how would Ben Gurion be impressed with him saying, we have so much more zechuyos than you? I don't know. Apparently, Ben Gurion was impressed with the Chazon Ish. I have reason to believe that's true because he agreed to the exemption. So I don't know. This is all hearsay. Nobody really knows what happened in that meeting. But I have reason to believe the formulation that I saw in an article that the Chazon Ish was saying, if you have two parties that are negotiating on an issue, if one party feels very strongly about an issue, and the other party sort of parv about it, so the party that's parv about it should cede to the party that feels very strongly about it. Now, the reason why I say that is because clearly today, that's not the case anymore. When he says, okay, 400 students learning yeshiva, it's so important. It's to build the community, like Dovi said, to build back what we lost in the Holocaust. That's what the Panovich Rav was, his whole mandate. I gave a shir on Bnei Brak, about the city of Bnei Brak, and the whole rebuilding of Torah was Panovich Rav, the Chazon Ish. And you could say for 1, 2, 3 generations, but look at what we have today, and it's not the scenario of, you don't care so much about this. Do you really need those 400 people in your army? Not really. So we care so much about this. We want to maintain this pure observance of learning. Let us have it. And then Ben Gurion's like, you know what? That makes a lot of sense because you care a lot about this. I don't really care so much about this. So let's just be practical. Does that still apply today? Does this hearsay, again, it's all hearsay, but does this presentation of the negotiation that happened between Ben Gurion and the Chazon Ish, between the representative of the Zionist community and the Haredi community, does that still hold weight today? I would venture to say it does not. And I don't think the Chazon Ish would say the same thing today. It's a totally different social issue, and both parties feel very strongly about it. So whatever position you're going to take, you can't say, well, one party doesn't really care and the other party does care. It's not true anymore. That's kind of where I was going with it, but I realized that I've been spending a lot of time on the history. Yeah, absolutely.
Is the
definitely gonna have to do a part 2.
American Haredi model in like Lakewood, etc., different than what's happening in Israel? My impression.
Yeah, my impression is that it is different. I'm not, number one, my knowledge of the different communities is limited, but just from my anecdotal, anecdotally, my experience has been that American yeshivish, whatever you want to call it, is more open to both adding to curriculum, more secular curriculum, and there's more openness to army service. That's why you saw during the Washington rally, I don't know that's only why, but there's a lot of factors here. October 7th, I don't mean to oversimplify something, but there was an upswell of support from many, many of the quote-unquote Aguda type shuls and people and balabatim, even though there were some muted voices. I say muted because I don't think there was, it wasn't like such a huge proclamation, but there were those who said, no, we shouldn't go to that rally or whatever it is. So you see that there has been somewhat of a shift. And I agree.
But I'm saying in practice, though,
Yeah.
the amount of people, like
Proportional.
who might start in yeshiva, but then enter into the secular world, right? And still remain very close to the yeshiva and to the community and be like steeped in Haredi values, but they're still
In the world.
they're have
Yes.
of some kind,
Right.
or maybe they want their kids to learn Kola, but
Right.
they own real estate or
Right.
old age homes and
yes.
Amazon businesses, right? Like there's a whole article
You're
in
in-
the Times about.
New York Times?
Yeah, the New York Times has a whole article about some of the most profitable and like this high volume Amazon businesses are all within these like Haredi
Really?
communities where they're like making a ton
Interesting.
of money using Amazon.
Can you send that to me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Borough
Yes,
Park
it's
and
true.
Lakewood.
It's true. The Israeli Haredi community and its position on not entering into the workforce, which by the way is starting to change. Even the numbers that we mentioned before are not necessarily. It's not 100% of people are not working, but even the concept of being engaged in society, the approach that the Israeli Haredi community has taken is very different than, let's just say, in broad strokes, the yeshiva community in the United States and in Canada. I have a friend, David Beshevkin, who has a podcast. He became pretty well known in 1840. So I remember he was interviewed a number of years ago on Headlines, David Lichtenstein's podcast. And he said that, in his feeling, he said, which community is doing well? Like the Haredi, the non-Orthodox, like this was like nothing to do with the draft. But he made a point, just to Dovi's point, that he believes that each age demographic has a different community that's succeeding in it. He said the youngest demographic, the Hasidic community, the Chida Rebbe is glorified. They have the wonderful songs, and they really excel with that young age. And then he said the yeshiva community for boys is able to pump up the learning, the Torah, the siyumim, the commitment to learning. And I don't know exactly how they're doing with the girls, but I assume that it's doing pretty well. But then he says something to sort of the Dovi's point, which is, but everybody's modern Orthodox when they're in their late 20s, 30s. Like everyone enters into the world at some level and has to navigate that. And that's basically modern Orthodoxy he feels the best framework to work within, like you said, working and living. And even if you have, you're associated with a certain yeshiva, but you're interacting with the world, you're being challenged by certain questions you'll get in the workplace, you'll have to, in some level, interface with the world. So he felt that the non-Orthodox community does the best with adults. But I guess it's a bigger topic. I'm sort of, not avoiding it. This topic it has overlap with the question of social participation, engagement in society, because the army is part of that, how it works in Israel. So it definitely has overlap. Okay, wow. So I see that we'll have to spend just maybe 10 minutes on some of the sources, and then we will continue with part 2 next time. So the Mishnah, I mentioned this before, the Mishnah in Sota is quoted by many to support the drafting of even yeshiva students, because the Mishnah in Sota presents the concept of a milchemes mitzvah that everyone serves. So just to read the Mishnayos, this is Mishnah Sota, Perek Tez, Mishnah Dalet, source number 3. So the Mishnah Dalet, it says that the Elu she'in zazim imkoman, these are the people who are not supposed to report to the camp to serve, and a list of a number of people who have exemptions. Quoting from Sukkim, it says, right, Bona Bayis v'chancho, someone who built a house and is dedicating it within that first year, not to karam v'chilolo, he plants a vineyard, and hanosias arusaso, someone who recently got married, hakonas es yivimto, fine. So another number of exemptions. However, if you continue reading in the Mishnayos, in Mishnah Zion, it says all of these exemptions. And by the way, one of the exemptions in Mishnah Hay, as I mentioned before, is if a person is rach halevav, a person is faint of heart, and some understand that to be that it's a faint of heart. They're afraid of going to war because they feel that they don't have. They are afraid of the fact that they don't have the schuyos. That's what it means to be faint of heart. So Misyare min ha'avira shebiyado, right? That's what Rabbi Yossi Aglili says in the Mishnah. A person feels they don't have the requisite zuchuyos, the merit to be successful at war. However, all of this is all in the Mishnah Zayin. B'medvar mamurim b'molchames rishos. That's when it comes to an elective war, which we'll have to define. However, hakol avol b'molchames mitzvah. If it's an obligatory war, a melchemes mitzvah, a mandatory war, hakol yotzin afilu chaser michadro v'chala michlupaso. Even a bride, even a groom from his room and a bride from her wedding canopy have to go out to war, and we've seen this. See the videos coming out during the Gaza war. People literally, they are getting married, and then leaving their wedding, going back into fight in Gaza, and that is an argument that is made using this Mishnah in Sota to say that today we have a Melchames mitzvah, and therefore everyone has to serve. Now the question becomes, we'll have to address, is that really true? Is it really a Melchames mitzvah? Yes, Jordan.
So the question about being faint of heart
Yeah.
applies, right? If you're going into combat.
Yeah.
Only a small percentage of Tzahal is actually combat.
Going into combat. It's a great
The rest
point.
are
Right.
combat support, and it's the range.
Tech
You have
support
people-
and
so
intelligence,
There's all
yeah.
kinds of home front. There's all kinds of things that are not nearly as dangerous.
Yes.
And does that help or hinder the discussion?
It's a great point.
Around the fear of going in, like, okay, I know I'm not going to qualify for combat, but there's other things I could do that I'm still serving.
Right.
People
It's a
on
great
the
point.
Rabbanut, people
Right.
that serve in some.
Shir
some
Lumi.
office, yeah.
Yeah. It's a great point. I'm making I'm presenting the pro draft position, which is even those people are all obligated to fight if it's a Melchames mitzvah. Even those who would have exemptions. So there is a concept of exemptions in the Torah, in the Mishnayos, codified in halacha. However, that's all when it comes to a elective war. But when it comes to a Melchames mitzvah, which we have yet to define, anyone who would have an exemption is not exempted. So you're right. In terms of the practical solutions, that's a great point, and it's one that on many yeshivas, there's a podcast that's specifically only on this issue. It's called Tzarech Ian, I think, or the Ian Institute, and we'll talk about that institute soon. But I remember listening to a podcast. There's a Haredi Hesder Yeshiva. Sounds like an oxymoron. But there's now a Haredi Hesder Yeshiva. They interviewed the Rosh Yeshiva, and his yeshiva is exactly what Jordan said. What they're doing is they have an agreement with the army that they learn for a number of years, and they have special tech training that they do with the boys. It's nothing to do with the army at that level. I'm oversimplifying it, but it's not Nachal Haredi. This is a different thing. It's called Yeshiva Derech Chaim or something, or Eitz Chaim. I don't remember. There may be more than one just version of this, but he says they take the tech equivalent levels of the highest expectations that the army has at their tech level, like intelligence, and they give those classes to the students. They're within the yeshiva framework, and then after they pass a number of different exams or whatever it is, which apparently the army either they support it or they make sure that they are equivalent to what their expectations are, then they serve in the army as they're in yeshiva, but specifically in the tech, the intelligence area, and they're like the top levels because they have to have a number of years of training, whatever it is. They worked out this deal. Now it only works for people who really want to do computers and intelligence and everything, but they're able to like simultaneously get these sort of university education in tech while they're in yeshiva and then serve and give back to the army without even really getting into combat at all. So it's a great point, and it's a pragmatic solution that has begun to start. It's, again, I admit it's not widespread, but it's starting to begin. This isn't a real yeshiva with a real Rosh Yeshiva who has the whole garb and he has students, and it's a real it's a real thing.
We should start a definition here.
Yeah.
Like regular army service, no one knows when the war is going to be.
Right.
That you're going to face, but just
Preemptive strike
your
or
regular
you're saying
service for 3 years, is that considered still?
that's the question, right? That's a really a good question, which we have yet to define. But I'm just laying down the issues today, I guess, and then we'll have to really jump in next time. So that's number one. Number two is that even in the sources, this is the other side, the pro-exemption approach, even within the Torah, in Parshas Bamidbar, there is on the books an exemption from the get-go of a certain category of people. Who are they? Shevet Levi. The pasuk in Parshas Bamidbar, Parak Aleph, pasuk Mem Tes, in source number 4, Ach es Mate Levi lo sifkod. Right? They're not counted, and the Shevet Levi is not counted in the census of those who served in the army. Now, if it's only Shevet Levi, so that's okay. That's based on your genealogy or whatever, your father. But what does that have to do with anybody else? So the Rambam famously at the end of Hilchos Shemitah V'Yovel, Perek Yud Beis, Halacha Yud Beis, he says it's not just Shevet Levi. However, anybody, any person could join, quote unquote, Shevet Levi, and he writes, V'lo Shevet Levi Bilvad, El Kol Ish V'ish Mikol Bo Ha'olam Asher Nvad Varucho Oso V'Yavinu Midatu Li'Badul Amal L'Fei Hashem L'Shar. So anyone who has this feeling of Nod V'Libo, that he feels he wants to devote himself, he has extra understanding and he wants to separate himself to serve Hashem, as was the case with Shevet Levi. Their goal was to serve in the Beis HaMikdash, to be the teachers, to be the spiritual Shevet. Anyone could join Shevet Levi, and just to prove that exemption from war, the previous halacha in Yud Beis, he describes that Shevet Levi was huvdlo midarchia olam lo orchei milchama, that they were separated from the obligations of this world, and they did not engage in war. So people banter about this Rambam as support for an exemption for yeshiva students. Now, Rav Meir Twersky, in the talk that I mentioned, that I listened to, he says this cannot be what the Rambam meant, for a simple reason. The Rambam in Hilchos Talmud Torah, this goes a little bit back to what Dovi was saying about participation and getting a job and studying in college and whatever Amazon tycoons there are in the yeshiva world. But the Rambam in Hilchos Talmud Torah, Perek Gimel Halacha Yud, he says explicitly that we should follow the approach Halacha L'Maisa of Rabbi Yishmael. What do I mean, the approach of Rabbi Yishmael? There's a famous machlokas. Since I know it, it's famous, but now maybe you'll know it, so it'll be famous for you. The Gemara in Brachos Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis. There's a machlokas. What approach should we take? Should we approach the world and partake in the world and have Torah im derech eretz? There's a sort of a general engagement with an occupation and studying Torah and also working, or should we only be focused on Torah learning? So the Gemara has it quotes as a machlokes between Rabbi Yishmael, who says Hanig bahen minag derech eretz. It says vasafta diganecha. Right, you should gather in the time your crops at the time of harvest, and that's Hanig bahen minag derech eretz. You should go the way of the world. You should have a job. That is divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, he says no. If you adam chorish b'shas chorisha, person plows in the plowing season, Ozur b'shas zriya, he sows in the sowing season, Kotzer b'shas ktsira, he harvests in the harvest season, etc., etc. He says, Torah ma tehei aleha. What's going to be with study of Torah? You're going to be so busy, you're not going to have time to come and learn on a Sunday morning. I guess they didn't have Sundays off. Now we have a 5-day week, which sometimes people are trying to say, I'll go into the office twice a week, work from home the other days of the week. Not saying that people don't have difficult time making parnasa today, but we're living in a different society. When you were a farmer back then, you lived, hand to mouth, and you had to work every season where there was a different job, and it was very, very difficult. We're not, we're living in a different society. But that was his approach. What's going to be with Torah? If you're always working, there's not going to be any Torah. So what are we passing? So the Rambam in Hilchos Talmud Torah says we follow the view of Rabbi Yishmael, which makes sense because the Gemara says many followed the ways of Rabbi Yishmael and were successful, and those who followed the ways of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai were not successful. So how could, just to get to this point, and probably have to hold it here, but how could the Rambam in the end of Hilchos Shemitah V'Yovel be saying anyone could just, there's 2 tracks basically. There's the Shevet Levi track, and if you want to do it, you want to go ahead and rely on Hashem. Hashem will provide. You don't have to serve in the army. You could be quote unquote Haredi. But if you want to be a regular Rabbi Yishmael Yid, so you have a different track. Why wouldn't the Rambam say that in Hilchos Talmud Torah if that's in fact what he's saying? He doesn't even mention the view of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in Hilchos Talmud Torah. So Rav Meir Twersky says it must be that it's well known that the Rambam talks about Divrei Agada at the end of each section. So it must be the Rambam is not telling you a halacha. He's not paskening. There's two tracks. There's one primary track. If a person is of that level of bitachon and he's L'malam and ateva, the Rambam is not prescribing, he's describing a person. He's describing a person who is just completely beyond any natural level. How does he have a parnasa? I don't know. Maybe he got a lottery ticket and Hashem gave him the money. Whatever it is, it's not a halacha, it's not a psak. And proof of this, he pointed out, is the Tzitz Eliezer. So we'll finish with this source. The Tzitz Eliezer of Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg points out that if you look at the Rambam in Hilchos Shabbos, in Perek Beis, Halacha Chaf Gimel, the Rambam clearly says that it's a mitzvah for anyone to go and serve and fight in an army if the Jewish people are under siege. He says if the non-Jewish nations are sieging Jewish cities, now it's talking about Hilchos Shabbos here, about whether you can violate Shabbos. He says if you're under threat, you have to violate Shabbos. And what does he write? Completely nothing to do with Shevet Levi exemption, nothing. Mitzvah al kol Yisrael sheyicholin lavol v'latzeis v'lazor la'achem shebematzor. It's an obligation, it's a mitzvah for every single member of the Jewish people, whoever can come in to assist their brethren who are under siege. So clearly the Rambam, and it doesn't say, Shevet Levi is exempt. Clearly the Rambam in Hilchos Shemitah V'Yovel at the end is describing a very high spiritual madriga, but it's not a halacha. It's not a psak. It's not that we sometimes paskin like Rabbi Yishmael and sometimes like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and those who want to can all opt for the track of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and get an exemption. That's clearly not what the Rambam had in mind, even though people throw that Rambam around in Hilchos Shemitah V'Yovel. So I see that we're up at the end of time for today. We've sort of touched on the issues and we've talked about the history. And we'll begin next time, Yirtzeh Hashem, with part 2 of the Talmudic sources on exemption and try to finish the topic next time. Everyone have a wonderful day.